Hello and welcome back to the channel. It's Mark from Powersonic and Apprentice 121. Today is a super interesting video. I want to get into a topic that I've mentioned on bits of content on my channel before and on other social media platforms. But before we get into all of it, I want to give a massive shout out to Dave Curtis from Napit. He's one of the technical support engineers, and he's been talking about this on his social media over the last several weeks and months, and it's given me the confidence to show you what I've been up to on my shed roof. This is capacitive coupling. Now, in essence, that is all to do with AC voltages ending up on solar PV array framework. Why that happens and what we can do about it are two of the big questions we're going to try and get into through the course of this video. And just to show you right at the very start, I am currently sat up here under safe test conditions with 122 volts sat there on the panel framework. Now, the big question is there current behind that can hurt us? Is it an issue for us to worry about? And why is it there in the first place? So I'm going to show you how I managed to introduce these voltages to my array on the shed and some of the things we can do about it. Let's get straight on with the video. So you can see up on the roof, the panels are very, very dirty. We've got lots of algae building up on here. This has kind of been left to fester for a little bit. And at the moment, we have got 5 volts. You can see I'm onto the frame over there, and we've got a lead going back off to the earth-in terminal for the shed. And that is set to lots and lots of copper in the ground. And yeah, that's the voltage we're getting in a minute. It is fluctuating up to 5 volts, but what I'm going to do now is we're going to clean all these off so they can start generating a little better. It will obviously introduce lots of moisture, and we'll see if that affects the value we're getting here. So I'm going to move my clamp meter to one side because I don't want to get that soaked, and we'll get a hose pipe and a brush and set 2 on all of these. So you can see me popping up here to clean the panels. I did actually record some audio on this, but my wireless mic was out of range and none of it was picked up. But I'm basically talking about a new product from Dex that Stuart Cato has made me aware of that helps moisture drain away from panels. And that's been specifically invented for systems that have panels in a more flat position than is atypical. You know, these are installed outside of manufacturer's specification. You can see that water pooling at the bottom of the panel. They're around 3 to 5 degrees pitch on this roof. And, you know, that doesn't drain away. So it kind of sits there and allows algae and mold to form. And it will put pressure on the seal, which is why manufacturers don't like these being installed flat. They like that little bit of angle there to drain the moisture off and away over the lip of the aluminium frame, so those seals aren't potentially going to let moisture in and through them. So I'm going to get some of those, and massive thanks to Stuart for sharing that in his content, because I was not aware of them whatsoever. And they're going to hopefully help me out in having this moisture taken away, not just for capacitive coupling, but for performance. I don't want that algae and mildew sitting there on those panels, stopping these doing their thing. Now you can see we've got lots of leaves and such that have been left on the panels as well, and that is why these are optimized. And optimizers in and of themselves are not the sole solution to this problem. You know, the Tigo ones will sit there at the panel's output voltage while they are generating, regardless of what the inverter is doing. The likes of Solar Edge is a little bit different, and they can detect and stop some of the capacitive coupling for being a thing on your array framework. But again, that is not a foolproof solution to the problem. We need a much more joined up approach. And there you can see we have creeped up to near enough 118, 119 volts AC. The panels are obviously very wet now. They've had a good soaking off, loads of moisture on there. You can see the moisture actually hanging on the bottom of these panels, which is what I was talking about from the other side, if I include that in the video, that there's a new product from Dex that can help me a little bit with that. See in this middle panel over here, it's actually sitting as well. All of that can be drained away and stop a lot of the moss build-up, which is more performance, and it'll also help the seals. So I think is what's happening here is a lot of the moisture is working its way into the seals. I actually know it is because I've damaged the seal on this bottom panel here to try and help amplify this scenario to demonstrate here. It's not something I would advise anyone else would do, and that's, as I said at the start of this video, one of the reasons I was nervous about sharing this content. But that just shows you we've now got over 119 volts, and this array presently is producing 30 watts. So it's not even generating that much at the minute. It's just that capacitive coupling effect up onto the array due to your transformerless inverter. And this is something that you need to be aware of when you are doing any maintenance around your solar panels. If the framework isn't bonded, you need to be making sure you're isolating both the AC and the DC. And we'll go off and do that now, and we'll see what voltages we're left with up here on the array when we get to that stage in just a second. Talking about capacitive coupling is essentially what you're seeing is the AC voltage from the inverter at roughly half its peak voltage appearing on the framework. And that's similar in, if you think of a dishwasher, for example, that's lost its CPC in the back of the socket front, you can have capacitive coupling due to the way that the source supply is connected into that appliance. So say the CPC drops out the back of the socket, if you go and measure off the frame of that dishwasher to a known earth, you will see roughly half the voltage supply. And the same is happening here. These panels are unearthed, I've disconnected the earth, and you're seeing that effect here when you measure back to true earth. Now the risk inside the equipotential zone for an unearthed piece of equipment is a consideration because people are likely to come between two potential differences. So if you're in your kitchen, for example, it's not unreasonable to expect that you may touch a metal sink and the dishwasher at the same time, and you would notice that effect. With an array up on this roof here, insulated from the mass of earth, it's unlikely anyone's ever going to be touching it whilst in contact with the mass of earth unless they are doing maintenance. So the risk on this is something that, you know, we need to evaluate through assessment, and that's something that should have been getting done for a long time. This isn't a new phenomenon. Installers have known about this since solar arrays started going up. If you speak to lots of the solar OGs, they will have seen this on occasion and have mitigating processes in place to deal with it. Now that can be isolations, so that you're making sure all of your DC and AC isolators are locked off. It can be monitoring. It can be ensuring that you don't have cracks in panel frames, you don't have moisture ingress into the panels themselves. And this is one of the things where I fall out with just bonding arrays to try and get rid of this problem. You know, you will do. I'll bond this in a minute and show how that voltage drops away. But are we masking the problem or are we fixing it? And are we introducing something that is potentially even more dangerous than just leaving that floating as is? Because if we get a fault, for example, in my shed below here, and this could be on a ground-mounted array, which is probably a better example. If you get a fault in your installation on the AC side and you've bonded all of that framework back to the earth of the installation, then during those fault conditions, the array framework will rise in potential. Now that could maybe put people in danger who are in and around that. The fault could sit there for 5 seconds sometimes. It could also cause damage to some of the equipment and components that's in your system, so your inverters, your optimizers, the panels themselves maybe, and the diodes that are in them. You know, there's all those things to think about, and the approach that I've taken here is to bond this array framework back to an earth electrode that is independent on the shed itself. Now, if I happen to get a fault in the shed, could be the socket circuit goes faulty or whatever, we may see some fault current on this array framework during those times, but my own risk assessment says that that's a very low probability. And even if I was to put a separate electrode in just for these panels, because of all of the overlapping earths within the mass of earth, you're not going to achieve an isolated point anyway, and it's unlikely in any kind of urban environment that you would do so either. So there are some considerations there that we really need to think about. Just thought I'd throw that into the mix there for a topic of discussion. So you can see now I've taken off the AC and DC rotary isolators, and we're left with around 1 volt of AC there on the array framework. So I can now pop on my earth. There is actually an earth cable under the array here which runs down the oval tube over there. I'm pointing in the right place. Off to the inverter. However, I can't get my clamp meter around it very easily, so I've disconnected that off the inverter, and I'm going to pop a little temporary earth on to the array framework that I can then clamp this around, and we'll see what current's flowing when it's energised. Give it a little tap, always a little tap. Should have done it with the back of the hand really. So hopefully this works. I guess to a large degree it depends how earthy that clamp is as to if this is going to work or not. But we'll go and pop the power back on now, and we'll have a little look and see what effect, if any, that has had. So you can see now we have got under 10 volts. So it's dropped that voltage right down on the array framework. I'm not sure if I'm brave enough to actually touch it, but that has taken away 110 volts worth of potential difference. We can pop the clamp meter on this earth now, and we'll see if there's any current flowing through it. So if we swing it over to a current measurement on the AC side and pop it around said earth, and you see on there we've got 8.3 milliamps. So there's a reasonable amount of current there, to be fair, and that's why a lot of the time you can detect this when you touch the array framework. There's enough current in there for it to be sensed by humans, essentially. Now, what I'm going to do is switch the array back off again, and we will see if that current sits there. It could be that it's running the opposite way. There could be a path back to earth through this array frame into the shed, potentially, and it's actually AC current that's in the earth, if you like. So the earth might be sitting that current from the rest of the install, and it's coming back this way. So if we turn the PV panels off and the AC inverter off, that earth path will still exist, and then we'll know with reasonable accuracy which way that current is going. So as expected, you can see that current's dropped away. So that is reasonably confident way now to say that milliamp leakage current is coming through the inverter into the array and then back to the earthing terminal rather than the other way around. And you'd expect so, because this shed is insulated from the massive earth. It's timber structure. It's very unlikely to have a more earthy path than the rest of the wider install. But it's always worth proving the point, and we've done that now. If we swing that back to voltage, we'll see if there is any voltage sat there. So we've got 0.58 volts, so next to nothing in terms of voltage either. So that's dropped that right away, which is a really good sign. We'd expect to see that, and absolutely nothing in terms of current. So you can see with the system isolated, we have got 0.5 volts, so next to nothing on the AC side, with the system isolated at the AC and DC isolators on the inverter. Now this will still be generating. They'd never turn off solar panels. They'll still be doing their thing and trying to send that power somewhere, but obviously with the inverter switched off, the DC cables having no point of connection back to the inverter, we're not seeing a voltage on the array framework, and we're not seeing a current there either, which is a real clear demonstration of the inverters that are transformerless putting that half peak voltage onto frameworks within solar PV systems. Now, as I showed at the start of this video, when it was dry and there was no moisture ingressing to the broken seal on the solar panel, I wasn't seeing that voltage. So that's a clear thing to keep mentioning, that we're looking at this as a way of curing the problem by bonding it, but are we just masking that problem? We'll talk about that later on in the video. So luckily we have an example of these panels at ground level where we can really look at them a bit closer. And when we're talking about these letting moisture in, it's generally the seals around the edge of the frame where the glass meets the aluminium frame, or a micro crack in the glass itself. And it's not impossible with these being shipped all around the world and in the back of wholesalers' vans and then lugged up scaffold, for those things to develop problems. And as soon as those seals are gone, and that could be because you've installed them in the way I did, at a pitch that's beyond the manufacturer's rating, allowing moisture to sit within the seal, as you would have seen through the course of that video, that moisture will find a way eventually, which is why they will generally dictate they want them sat at a certain angle. And if you look on the label on the back here, if I can get it to focus, you can see these are actually protection class 2. So these are class 2 items. In theory, you should have that double insulation between the casing and the live parts, and you can see it's dictated again by that logo on the panel itself. So you don't necessarily need to earth these in and of themselves. And we'll have a little look at an inverter's instructions as well and see how that plays out. But I just wanted to show you that close-up within a panel itself. So they're the things you're watching for. It's moisture sitting on seals and any micro cracks in the glass that could cause you a problem. And then on the MC4s on the back, again, it's making sure you use match connectors and that they are sealed properly in the backs and also where they join together, so you've not got any moisture finding its way into there to pick up those voltages and transfer them into your framework. Now you can see here with a typical inverter, and this one's from Polar ESS, but they're all very much the same. This is a class 1. So this is a class 1 inverter, which means it needs to be earthed. And I guess that's the subtle difference between those two parts. So is when you've got your capacitive coupling and this is a transformerless inverter, the very nature of how they operate can have that half peak voltage transferred into the DC strings of things and taken up to your array framework, which is class 2, and unearthed and then sit there. If that is making sense, we'll have a little better explanation of that in just a second. So when we understand what's actually going on and how these voltages are appearing in places we're maybe not expecting them, we can start to look at managing our risk through that. You know, we can install a solar PV system that's actually absolutely perfect the day it goes in. There's no moisture ingress anywhere, all of our cables and terminations and MC4 connectors are absolutely perfect. However, over the fullness of time, it could be that a bird drops a stone or something onto one of the panels and cracks the glass and we start to see moisture ingress into it. If that array framework hasn't been earthed, those voltages can sit there, and all it takes is for a consumer to go onto a single-storey building and start wiping down their panels because they've got a bit mucky, and they may start to notice those tingles. It could be that you erect a scaffold tower because one of the panels has started performing poorly or an optimizer's failed and you go to remove that, and rather than shutting the array down by the AC and DC isolators, you just get to work. And that again is when you can expose yourself to that voltage. Now the question is that a dangerous circumstance for us to go to work? Is that 120 volts and under 10 milliamps something that we need to be worried about? And if we look at the regulations of things, they're in the realms of consideration in terms of our safety. They can hurt us. So that is why it is really important to keep sharing this message of using those isolation points for any maintenance activity. And when you're installing this stuff, so you're putting a new array onto somebody's roof, if you've omitted those DC isolators and they're going straight into your inverter, ensure that it's shut down, that the DC isolator on it is shut down, that the AC isolator is shut down, because you could be climbing your ladders onto the scaffold deck, and if that system's generating, so it could be that you're going to fit the bird guard, for example, you've got the system on and commissioned, you're happy it's working, and then you go to fit the bird guard, typically the last thing we do, because if there is a problem with something, you don't want to be stripping bird guard off to change a faulty optimizer or panel. Make sure you shut it down at that stage, because you could feel that, and it's the sensation that could push you off the ladder. Not so much the electric shock making you kind of be shocked and fall, but just like it startles, it can startle people. And you could fall backwards off the ladder, you could fall off the scaffold. You know, these things are all possible. It's low probability, but it's possible, and it's avoidable through careful risk assessment, method statement, and managing your work activity. So even while you're installing this stuff, it's something to be mindful of. And proper testing as well. Too often the only tests that are done with solar PV systems is switch it on and see if it generates what looks to be the right numbers. You know, there's great equipment that I've shown on my channel from TIS, which can really help you in determining the locations of faults, in the way systems are performing, and the very basics of where voltages and currents are present. So I guess all of that brings us back to what we can and should be doing about this. And for me, the first step is to identify it, to make sure, you know, at the stage of installation that we are monitoring to see if this is a factor or not, and that comes through testing. So we need to make sure that we're actually looking for this and seeing if it's present on our new installations. It shouldn't be, but it could be. And then in terms of maintenance, it's making sure that we're introducing the correct RAMs. That should always have been the case, but just to kind of enforce that message. Certainly as an industry of things, I'd like to see more of that from the likes of the NIC and NAPIT, the IET, ECA and everyone, to really drive that message out there for consumers as well as actual electricians and roofers. And then I suppose it's, you know, if we're going to bond all of these or not, and that has a trade-off in one direction that in my own mind I'm kind of batting around with at the minute. You know, with the ground-mounted side of things, you know, you're going to have that by default anyway. These things are driven into the mass of earth through ground screws or concreted in supports or piles drived into the ground. However they've been put in there, they will have that earth path through the very nature of how they are constructed. And generally, because of that, those frames will be bonded to an earth point as well. So in that side of things, you know, this is already more than likely going to exist anyway if we're looking at large scale PV arrays at the grid infrastructure side of things. Now, if you're in someone's domestic garden or you're putting a small PV system on a ground mount kind of setup, again, you're going to have that earth path in place. And I know of plenty of solar installers that have been earthing their roof-based systems for a long, long time anyway, and there's other arguments around doing that for different reasons. By the way, and yeah, it's one of those where, you know, the likelihood of someone interacting with that equipment when those voltages are sat there through capacitive coupling is very, very low. I would say if they've got Velux windows where someone might attempt to clean the panels out of or be in and around through the course of using that window, or if it's an array that reaches the first story of a dwelling where someone could be expected to touch it, or a shed like mine where somebody could reasonably be expected to touch that array. You know, my kids are always messing around in the little play centre to the side of that shed that I built them and ending up on the roof from time to time as much as they're told not to. And it's making sure that it's safe with them in and around that as well. So there's all of those kind of considerations to think about. Up on your typical house, 2 stories high, you know, the fact that you bond that array down and under fault conditions, and I'm thinking of a time when maybe, I don't know, the main tail is connected to earth and you don't have quite enough current flow to take the service fuse out as quickly as you might like, and it hangs that fault for a duration. That could then be passed into the framework through your optimizers, through the panels, and cause things to go wrong, and then need some sort of maintenance and repair work due to that where no capacitive coupling was in place. I could be way off in my thoughts on that. They are just things that have sprung into my mind around this issue, really, and I'm sharing the video now inspired by Dave and for him putting his content out there on all of this, for others' feedback and for people to chat and chew around that message. I think sometimes we get bogged down in some of these niche subjects in industry. We've seen it with pen faults, for example, and outdoor consumer units, potential induced degradation of solar systems. These are all micro problems in the grand scheme of things, and we have got way, way bigger issues going on out in industry to fix. And I often reference this, going back to the training thing, and I'm always going on about that through Apprentice 1-to-1, that all the while we're talking about this, it's brilliant, but behind us, the actual industry is on fire right now. We've got this new bid budget that's come in, it's going to start hurting employers. I was on the Electricians podcast this last Sunday night talking about what's coming in April and beyond next year and how we need to start preparing and making sure we're ready for that. Those high seas are coming and you need to be in tip-top condition as the best captain of your ship you can be to navigate that, because there's going to be a lot of people sinking, unfortunately. I think we're going back to the times of 2008 in lots of ways. And the wider skills crisis out in industry and the gatekeeping around all of that in the solar sector, you know, is what I would like to see is, you know, the bar on entry to this industry been maintained and held, and we've not seen that in the electrical industry over the years from the CPS providers, and there's been quite a shift, I would say, in the last 2 or 3 years where they are getting much, much better at that. But the world of MCS and solar, it does still seem a lot like the Wild West. And if we're really serious about changing standards, improving safety, we need to tackle some of those big problems together and head on, while chatting about these more niche and interesting subjects that ultimately aren't going to drastically change the outcome out in industry. I think that's the brutal honesty around that subject, and I'm not saying that to belittle the topic of capacitive coupling. As I've shown in this video, it can be a really, really serious thing. Same as pen faults can be. But there's more regularly occurring and more damaging and destructive things that we need to focus on, a lot more determined, in my opinion. Anyway, that was a slight sidetrack from this particular topic. We'll close this video out in just a sec. So thank you very much for watching. This has been an interesting one. I've learned a lot myself through some of the research I've done on this. I do want to emphasize again that a lot of the time when you are seeing voltages on your array framework, there is usually something wrong. I've had a lot of contractors contact me when they've been finding these phantom voltages on framework, noticing shocks and tingles when they're climbing scaffold and touching panels. And the majority of the time it's due to MC4 connectors that have had moisture ingress into them, or a cable that has frayed somewhere on the array system, and it is not actually to do with just capacitive coupling and bonding the system to get rid of those voltages. There are other things to investigate and try and find to actually solve this rather than mask it. So that is one of the reasons I haven't shared this content before. I didn't want people to just start thinking, well, if we bond everything, those voltages and currents will disappear and everything is absolutely fine. You know, electrical systems, a lot of it is magic to a large degree. You know, when we're talking about these half peak voltage values appearing on framework and the capacitive coupling effects, and I mentioned about a dishwasher or a washing machine as another example of that, of an appliance where this can happen in your actual home. It's one of those where just bonding your way out of trouble can sometimes cause more things to go wrong down the road than you're actually trying to fix at the start. So I think it needs some investigation by more smarter people than me, basically, before anyone forms a view. I've just shared an example here on my system. One of the things that I also want to mention is around, you know, the safety aspect when you're working in and among solar PV. It's not a new thing to risk assess doing that, and isolation points have been built into systems for decades so that people coming to interact with ground-mounted, roof-mounted systems, they always should be switched off. That is not a new phenomenon. It's not something that we're just starting to be aware of because of capacitive coupling. There are other risks there as well. So if you are going to clean your solar panels as a consumer, if you're doing any kind of maintenance on them as an electrician, make sure you're isolating those DC and AC isolators and keeping yourself as safe as possible. And always verify as well. That's the safe isolation procedure. You need to be checking on the array framework that there are no AC and DC voltages before you go and interact, and put yourself amongst them the same way you would inside an electrical system in a traditional dwelling. You know, we wouldn't go to work live without checking, would we? So do the same with the AC and DC side of things. And finally, just that this is a really, really rare problem. There is lots of modern technologies now that prevent this from being a thing. Solar panels have come on leaps and bounds, and I've had to deliberately introduce a leak into one of these to start seeing this problem on my system. On older arrays, it definitely could be something you're going to come across, particularly ones with older inverters and the lack of any optimizers. If you're coming across, for example, a SIG energy system, they have AFCI, GFCI, so earth leakage arc detection built in. They're also consistently measuring the insulation resistance through the PV array. And if that starts to drop away, where moisture has found a way into a solar panel or a connector, it shuts down and reports on it. And it's the same for your optimizers as well. So I don't want industry to be scared that this is some new phenomenon that's recently been discovered and we all need to start panicking and bonding everything. You know, there's been evolution in the time of things for us not to have to worry about this as much as we maybe once would have done. And as I said in the course of this video, the solar OGs, the people who've been at this a long time, are well aware of it. So a lot of this information is for newer entrants to industry who are maybe noticing some tingles on their systems as they're installing them. Check that you don't have a smashed panel. Check that your seals all look in good order. Triple and double check your MC4 connectors. Make sure you've got no frayed and strayed leads, and investigate. Don't just throw a bond on something and see the voltage go away and think, capacitive coupling, I've fixed it. There's usually more to it than that. If you've got any questions or comments around this video, please do drop them in below. There'll be a link in the description to go off and check out Dave Curtis's post on LinkedIn as well. And if you've got any other bits of content that are floating around in the social media of things, please do drop them in the comments as well for people to go off and dig into all of that. I hope you found this video useful. We'll be back with another one soon. If you've not already, please do subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you've not enjoyed the content. We have recently passed 14,000 subscribers, which I find absolutely crazy, and over 2 million views, which is just nuts for a boring old electrician just sharing his day job online. And I'm really grateful to everybody who has watched and enjoyed my content, and those of you who haven't, thank you very much. It's a huge hobby and interest of mine editing these things together, and your support and encouragement is not unvalued. I'll see you on the next one.